Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. So, I've made videos where I fixed the retro cups of Mario Kart DS, Wii, and 7, according to my liking. And well, all of those were really fun videos to make. So naturally, the next step should be to fix the cups of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass.
Wait, what about base Mario Kart 8? Are you gonna fix those cups too?
Oh yeah, that. Well, maybe someday, but when I looked over them, I realized that there's actually almost nothing I'd like to change at all. Sure, not all courses selected were great tracks originally, but the renovations brought to them makes me feel satisfied about frankly all of them. If I had to change something, I'd make the road more narrow in Toad's Turnpike and replace Royal Raceway with Toad's Factory. Double Toad tracks? That's fine, they're different enough anyways. But yeah, so instead, let's move on right away to the Booster Course Pass, and for this one, there is a lot that can be better. Obviously, I'll always have a soft spot for this DLC due to how many videos I've made on it, but no amount of bias can take away the fact that it was still full of problems. From the rushed and oversimplistic graphics, downright awful track choices, as well as the weird cup orderings, all of these were aspects that I always thought about while this DLC was ongoing, wondering how I could have made things better. So now I thought, why don't I take matters into my own hands for this video and discuss how I would change things. Although I'm also gonna have to set up some rules first, just so that these picks don't become too random. First, I'm gonna ensure that every single Tour City and Nitro track gets to keep a spot here. Even if not everybody likes them, I personally do, the fact remains that this is a DLC composed of tracks from a game where you can't always play every track, due to how the tour system works, and for that reason it's only fair to have them preserved in a game where they're always available. Except for the remix tracks, but then again they're just upgraded version of SNES tracks, so it's not exactly a big loss. And speaking of which, second, this also means that all the retro tracks I can pick have to be courses already in Mario Kart Tour. Although actually I might take some liberties here. As we saw with some tracks like Wii Rainbow Road and Bowser Castle 3, if they so badly want a specific track for the DLC, they'll go ahead and make a tour version of that track just for that. Because there's no other excuse for why they would go on and make one high quality SNES remake. However, with that said, I still won't pick tracks that wouldn't work at all in Mario Kart Tour. Finally, the last rule is I can make changes to already existing tracks too, whether it's adding more hazards, elements, or updating the visuals. Because if I was in charge, I'd absolutely ensure that that happened. But yeah, anyways, with all that being said, I say, let's get started. Starting things off nice and simple with Wave 1, the first track of the Golden Dash Cup, Paris Promenade, is fortunately already the perfect opener track for this DLC. Among the Tour City tracks, it's one of the simpler ones with minimal hazards and a serene atmosphere, and moreover, it also introduces us to the arrow gimmick in the best way possible, by having the first two laps be pretty standard, with just some split paths here and there, and then surprising you on the last lap by having you drive backwards suddenly. None of the other city tracks would have really been able to do this without one layout not getting included in the race, and seeing as the arrows are kind of the main gimmick introduced in this pass, I see this course as a perfect first impression. However, 3DS Toad Circuit is a pretty underwhelming track to follow up with. While Paris is a pretty ambitious opener, all things considered, this one doesn't really do anything interesting at all, besides having a few shortcuts and a random glider pad. I can still kind of see why it's here, since Paris Promenade is pretty unique, and they might have wanted a more traditional starter course to follow it up with, but considering how generic it is, it doesn't leave a good impression for the rest of the DLC. So instead, how about we put the GC and Luigi circuit here? This is a much more unique starter track in comparison, because while it's still pretty simple, the fact that the middle paths are intertwined, allowing you to collide with players in the back, makes it stand out more and allow for more chaos to ensue. And moreover, there's already a section like that in Paris Promenade, thanks to the backwards lap. So to have the track right after expand on that, while also serving as the traditional opener, would feel so much more fitting. Currently, this track is not in Mario Kart Tour, but if they wanted to have this course here, you can bet they would have added it to Tour just for that. On the other hand, the Choco Mountain is one of the better made Tour retro tracks, with not only better texture work than usually, but it even expands on the original track by changing some areas to make them stand out more. However, the whole Chocolate Mountain setting is also a little too niche for the first cup, which in my opinion should have generally more basic themes to ease people into the pass. So, how about Mushroom Gorge here instead? It would be a step up in difficulty, with more pitfalls and split roadways, and more shortcuts, and it's a fan favorite Mario Kart Wii course. That way, it would also incentivize people to get this DLC to begin with, which is obviously important so that Nintendo can make some money! Oh yeah, but speaking of Mario Kart Wii fan favorites, Coconut Mall is a course I'm immediately gonna throw away. I hate this remake. Even if you fix the color scheme to make it less orange, I feel like this is also one of those tour remakes that is kind of impossible to fix visually for the DLC, because of how much more cartoony all of the aesthetics are. And moreover, I also think it's really unfitting as a cup finale. It's kind of frantic, but also clearly not climactic enough for it, with the happy-go-lucky soundtrack. So instead, let's cap off the Golden Dash Cup with 3DS Shy Guy Bazaar. This track was actually initially planned to be in Mario Kart 8's original DLC, before it was unfortunately scrapped, which is a bit sad, because to me, it's definitely one of the more intriguing beginner tracks. The starry night laying over the desert market makes for a really unique atmosphere that's both calm, but also a bit exciting and climactic. And there's plenty of obstacles and hazards to be worried about too, which is why I think it would be a way better fit in this slot. And moreover, it also leaves people hyped for the rest of the DLC, as it's not too chaotic. And sure, on one hand, we got this track in the Mario Kart world anyway, so it might be a bit repetitive to have it here too, but at the same time, I still kind of want another version permanently set at night, as the world remake operates under a day and night cycle. But yeah, and that's the Golden Dash Cup finished. Now onto the Lucky Cat Cup. This one should also be generally easygoing, as it's still the first wave, but with maybe slightly more niche and difficult tracks. Once again, the starter track remains the same as it already was. Even though I dislike Tokyo Blur personally for its generic theme and oversimplistic layout, I've also said to myself that all tour tracks should be preserved in a console game. And well, since this is the most basic one, it's better to be done with early than later. And at least in Wave 1, it kinda prepares players for how city tracks will work going forward. Since unlike in Paris, this time every lap is different now. So yeah. For the second slot, this seems like a good place to move Choco Mountain to. After all, it's still a track on the easy side, so no reason to move it out of Wave 1, but the more creative setting I think would suit the second cup a lot more, to show that this DLC will slowly get more ambitious and unique over time. And plus, the happy-go-lucky vibes are fitting for a second course. And for the third track, we're only gonna continue to go up in quality. For the last retro track in Wave 1, I think DS Luigi's Mansion would be a thrilling course to leave us on. Like the last track, it's still on the easier side, being a Mushroom Cup track after all, but the far more dangerous and spooky setting would definitely raise the stakes and leave us longing for what retro tracks we'll get in Wave 2. And also, it's a fan favorite. Now, for the true final course this wave, I was admittedly a bit conflicted on what to pick. On one hand, I don't mind Ninja Hideaway's inclusion here. The fact that the emblem of this cup is a Japanese trinket makes it kind of fitting that we have two Japanese-themed tracks in this cup. But at the same time, I think difficulty is a more important factor when deciding these cups. And while Ninja Hideaway is an amazing course that for most people redeemed Wave 1, isn't it also a little too difficult for it? I personally think it is, so instead, similarly to Tokyo, I'm just gonna get the weakest out of the way first, in this case Sky High Sunday. On one hand, I guess this would be kind of underwhelming as it's just an oval, but at least it does have a lot of energy, with its bright colors, upbeat music, and numerous split paths. And from a marketing standpoint, since this track wasn't in tour at the time, Nintendo could kind of lie to us and raise our hype by showing that we're technically getting new tracks too.
But, Albert, this track is already preserved in Mario Kart World. You don't have to pick it for the Booster Course Pass.
That is actually true, you're right about that. But I still like Sky High Sunday in the Booster Course Pass a bit too. As long as the graphics get fixed and the railings can't be clipped through, it would be a harmless enough alternate take on the track. And in fact, I think people in general wouldn't be as harsh towards it either. Overall, I just think it would be chaotic enough for the first wave's ending. But anyways, that's Wave 1 all wrapped up and done. Personally, I think this would definitely leave better of a first impression, with generally more consistent track quality on the whole. I didn't hate the first wave initially, but it was definitely a little all over the place, with too many remakes that didn't bring the original tracks justice, with Skygarden in particular being a disappointment. Seriously, this shouldn't be anywhere near this DLC. There are so many better tour remakes worth preserving. Moving on to Wave 2, the Turnip Cup is actually the one I'm gonna keep almost exactly as it is already. I know a lot of people have issues with this one, but honestly, most of the tracks there are not only great picks for the DLC as a whole, but they also make perfect sense to be in this cup specifically. New York Minute, for example, the first track here is very simple, but it's also more aesthetically unique than the previous two city tracks, making it a fitting opener for the second wave. And Calamar Desert, the third track, lays an excellent foundation by being the first retro course with the arrow gimmick, teasing people for what to expect up ahead. And then Waluigi Pinball, the finale, is a great way to build up even more hype for future cups early on, with its immaculate theming and immensely positive fan reception. As long as we add back some of the sound effects that were lost in the remake and make the slide section be an anti-gravity, and there would be very little to complain about at all. The only course which I'm gonna swap out from here is the dreadful Mario Circuit 3, and on one hand I can still kind of see why it's here. We're still early on in the DLC, so a circuit isn't out of place, and the SNES Mario Circuit theme is probably one of the most iconic and classic in the series, so it's expected to have at least one of them here, as a way to kind of celebrate the SNES legacy. But Mario Circuit 3 was a really bad choice for this, considering not only how empty and utterly basic the layout is, but also because we already had it in Mario Kart Wii anyways. Why is it back? The fact that it was the first Mario Kart course ever made is not enough justification. However, at the same time, I wouldn't want Mario Circuit 4 here either, because while it's got more interesting turns, I also think it might be a little too difficult for Wave 2. So instead, how about Remix Mario Circuit? It's easily the most interesting and modernized take on this archetype, having not only 2 big jumps, but even several floating bricks you can drive over. It almost feels like a celebration of the SNES Mario Circuit legacy as a whole, and honestly, it makes me wonder why we couldn't have had this course instead originally. Especially since the other ones have already had their time to shine in other games. So yeah, overall, the Turnip Cup is virtually unchanged outside of that. Congratulations! However, when it comes to the Propeller Cup, things are gonna look far more different. As the second cup of the second wave, this should be our first step into noticeably more ambitious territory, while still keeping itself somewhat grounded. The opener track, Sydney Sprint, is the only one I'm gonna keep exactly the same as it is already, as it perfectly demonstrates what I mean. Layout-wise, it's another more simple city track at its core with fairly smooth turns, but the atmosphere is also way more hectic than what the previous 3 had to offer. And moreover, it's also the first city to have a more innovative routing, with the second lap incorporating multiple variants at once, and the third lap being a reverse of the first one. It's really beautiful progression, that cements that city tracks will from now on become a lot more interesting. The second track, Snowland, is... wait. Why is there a snow track in the summer wave? Yeah, I'm not too sure how to feel about that. It's not that major of a deal, and I guess it kinda works when it's set right after Sydney, which, as you know, has winter while it's summer on the northern hemisphere, but actually it doesn't matter. I found another spot for it anyways. So in the meantime, let's move forward Daisy Cruiser to this slot. This one would not only fit right at home seasonally, but gameplay-wise, it would also start to amp up the stakes. Because while the theme is incredibly calm and relaxing, the layout actually has quite a few tight corners here and there, in addition to housing some challenging obstacles to maneuver around, like the moving tables. I think I'd like it, but following that, Wee Maple Treeway in the third slot will continue to raise the stakes, both literally and figuratively. Like the last track, this one also bathes under a soothing theme, but it's also more inherently dangerous from the get-go, having it traverse a giant tree with sharp turns and minimal guardrails. And as a bonus, the autumn aesthetic would also work as a nice teaser for the holiday season, moving us away from the warmth of summer. I don't think I'd bring back the Jack-Off Bridge, as half the fun associated with it was Mario Kart Wii's dramatic jump physics, but at the same time, the glider is a functioning replacement either way. And it's not like the bridge was the only thing that made the track good, so I'll keep this remake as it is. Would it be a little bit too hard maybe? I suppose to an extent, yeah, but I mean it is the penultimate track here. I think we can allow ourselves to get a bit more dramatic, at least as a way to tease Wave 3. And lastly, for Wave 2's finale, there was really only one course I figured made sense to be here. The only Torn Nitro which wouldn't feel too ambitious here, nor has a niche theme. Piranha Plant Pipeline, or as I would rename it to, Warpipe Canyon. The fact that this was the only new Tor track that didn't get remade for the pass originally is something I will never forgive, especially since they didn't even make up for it with a remake in World. Why would you actively not preserve every Tor track in the DLC that preserves the original Tor content? Sure, maybe the camera might have been a bit janky with this track, but considering this DLC is no stranger to jank, I don't see why this one has to be signaled out. And it's even more sad because, in my opinion at least, it's actually a really good f***ing course. While the aesthetic is somewhat uninspired, the gameplay is shockingly chaotic for what it is, with plenty of half-pipes scattered throughout, an unusually distinctive split path section, as well as numerous hazards and set pieces, making it surprisingly hard despite its somewhat smooth turns. And I think this combination would be a perfect note to leave us on, to keep us excited for what Wave 3 will have to offer. And with that, Wave 2 has now been finished. Again, I think this would leave a much better taste in people's mouths than what we currently have. I like the Wave 2 we have now still, but at the same time, having more Mushroom Cup courses than Wave 1 is kind of a risky move, even if one of them is marginally changed. Moving into Wave 3 though, the Rock Cup is where the difficulty is gonna start to significantly increase, even if it still will start smoothly. And just like the last cup, the only course I'm keeping the same is the city course London Loop in the opening slots. It's by far the simplest city track we've left to pick from, and the cold and foggy atmosphere would send the message that we've entered dangerous territory, especially with the chain jumps getting freed on lap 3. So no changes at all. With that said though, while Boost Cinema right after does appropriately carry on with the Rock Cup's unwelcoming theme so far, I do think it's a little too much immediately. So while the track is a good remake, I'm delaying it to a future cup until further notice. So instead, this is where Snowland gets to step in. It's a simple track, but with more slippery road than anything before, and the winter theming definitely suits the start of the winter wave, so this would just be a nice calmer track before the point of no return. And what is the point of no return, you might ask? Well, that I've decided shall be Wario's Galleon. To be honest, out of all the retro tracks we got in Mario Kart World, this is the one I'm most confused by why we didn't get it for the Booster Course Pass as well first. Choco Mountain in that game got a huge makeover in its theme, which is why in retrospect I'm glad we got a more traditional remake for it in Deluxe too for variety. But why didn't we get the same for Wario's Galleon too? It's a track that's basically built around underwater driving, something that doesn't exist in Mario Kart World. So naturally I feel kind of obligated to give it a more faithful remake as well here. And why not as the third slot of the Rock Cup? I think it would be a magnificent showcase that we're gonna get more chaotic now, with its sharp turns and intense atmosphere. In either case, it would certainly be more fitting than Alpine Pass, which should not have been let near the Booster Course Pass, with Deluxe's more unsatisfying glider physics. Actually, now that I think about it, these two tracks honestly should have swapped games, since World has way more fluid gliding physics. But anyways. And lastly, for the fourth track of this cup, this one is largely just here because it wouldn't really fit anywhere else, but as per what I said at the start of the video, I want to preserve every Tor Nitro track there is, and that's why ending off the Rock Cup, I'm pushing forward Merry Mountain. So here's the thing, I don't hate its current placement before Rainbow Road. I think atmospherically, it does a really nice job of building up to it, with its festive and grand theme, but my god, it is so simple and easy. There's just almost nothing to it, in addition to having an incredibly short and lackluster layout. So even if you were to make some minor changes to it, I don't think it could ever be hard enough to justify itself as the penultimate track to the first half of the pass. But the holiday theming still suits Wave 3, and it's definitely got a climactic feel that leaves you wanting more. So I think this is probably the best spot we can pick for it. Would it be a slightly underwhelming finale? Maybe a bit, but I think it would still be fine, and I could still make a few adjustments. I'll add a couple of Goombas on the road up to the mountain, and then for the final stretch I'll replace the anti-gravity spinners with some snowmen and a dash panel to ensure it doesn't drag. In either case, at least the Moon Cup won't be dragged down now, luckily. And speaking of, that's where we're gonna head next, the Moon Cup. As the finale to the midway point of the pass, I think it already does a fairly decent job of acting as an open-ended last cup. It's climactic and fairly challenging, but not so much that it doesn't leave itself open for sequels. And that's why the Moon Cup is largely gonna stay the same as it does already. 3DS Rainbow Road is obviously a very fitting finale, no complaints there. It's a grand adventure, but it's also on the easier side, so it leaves people wanting more for waves 4 to 6. And DS Peach Gardens is an excellent calm before storm for the second slot, with its serene atmosphere but still ambitious layout and gimmicks, involving the Tor arrows. However, the other two slots, yeah, they could use some work. I think Berlin Byways, all things considered, is a somewhat average city course to start off with, because while it certainly got the challenge for this cup, the aesthetic is also among the most generic out of all the city courses, which leaves a bit of a sour taste. So instead, why don't we get an actually night-themed city track to open up the Moon Cup? Introducing Singapore Speedway. This one I think would easily be the best of the bunch to end off the first DLC year with. It's fairly simple in terms of layout, lots of smooth turns and all, but the atmosphere is also way more vibrant and chaotic than previous city courses, with a lot more unique road assets and aesthetics, which I think would make it a nice bridge between the more simple going cities and the more ambitious ones of the late game. With that said, I'd also change the routing quite a bit though. I think the first lap is decent enough to draw you in, even if it prioritizes style over substance, and the final lap is incredibly thrilling with lots of different set pieces, but the second lap is pretty dull, since you only go through Chinatown and then it's pretty much over already. So instead, here's how I would fix the second lap. You go through Chinatown, although you enter from the exit, and then you drive on the boulevard with Goomba Towers before you're back at the finish line again. That way, it leaves a bit more of an impression and isn't over in 10 seconds. And then lastly, for the penultimate slot here, I don't think there's anything that would quite set the mood up for Rainbow Road as Moonview Highway would. The current remake we have of this track right now was, safe to say, kind of underwhelming. There's barely any cars on the road, resulting in a fairly lackluster and unchallenging race, and while the remake certainly tries to be energetic enough to make up for it, it's not enough. And that's why in my fixed Booster Course Pass, I would go back to how it was in Wii, with way more vehicles active at all times, and with way more erratic behavior. spontaneously changing lanes whenever they feel like. This way, I think it could be an absolutely insane challenge for you to get through before you're rewarded with Rainbow Road. And I mean, come on, it's Moon View Highway. Even more reason to put it in the Moon Cup. Anyways, now that the midway finale of Wave 3 has been finished, let's go back to normalcy with Wave 4. As the starting wave of New Year, this one should naturally dial down the difficulty and chaos a bit, and opt for a more welcoming vibe again, similar to Wave 1, even if it's still not gonna shy away from challenge. And as for the Fruit Cup, it's... wait, hold up. Wave 4 is this fire already? I mean, okay, if you've watched my videos in the past, you probably already knew how much I love the 4th wave of this DLC, but in a shocking twist of turns, I'm gonna keep almost the entire wave the same as it is already. In fact, for the Fruit Cup, I'm not gonna change any track at all. Amsterdam Drift is almost the perfect city track to open up a new year. It's invigorating, has an incredibly pleasant countryside theme, and it's also really diverse in terms of set pieces, setting you up for what to expect for the remainder of the tour tracks. Riverside Park right after is a short and soothing little jungle safari, to calm you down after the rather ambitious Amsterdam. And DK's snowboard cross in the third slot appropriately raises the stakes again, with its sportsy mountain theme, before Yoshi's Island magnificently leaves you excited as the ender. It's somewhat simple in its layout, but the insane attention to detail to its source material as a crossover track leaves you on an immensely satisfying note, wondering what the rest of this year will have in store. Honestly, is there really anything that has to be changed about this cup? Well, I guess there is one thing, specifically the route for Amsterdam Drift. Again, the first lap is really good, staying on the easy side while still giving you some stunning and refreshing sights, and the second lap starts off fine, giving you some visual variety with the canals, but it's not enough to lift it considering it's fairly uninteresting. And then the third lap just goes a little too off the charts, with its road leading to the tulip field being a little too unnaturally sharp and twisty. So instead, how about the flower fields get to end off lap 2 instead? After all, it's just a left turn away once you're through the canal, which would flow a lot more organically. And then the actual lap 3 instead would have you go around to do the first lap again, but in reverse. That way, it all kinda wraps up nicely, finishing where you started, plus it means you get to end the race off of a big glider section, which, you know, is always a rewarding bonus. So yeah, the Fruit Cup. Good job, Nintendo. You were almost flawless with this one. A bit less so can be said for the Boomerang Cup, however even here I'm gonna keep the two retro tracks as they are. Obviously, since Wave 4 is a bit of a new beginning, it makes sense to have a circuit track somewhere here, but since we're also halfway through the pass, why not put in the toughest Mario circuit? And you know, before anyone says it, it did not replace Airship Fortress, shut the f up. That track would have had no business being so early in the year, and for that matter, I'm not gonna add that track at all to my fix. It's overrated as and the fact that Mario Kart World somehow made it more underwhelming with all the grind rails that make you skip half the track makes me even more relieved we got this gem instead. Cope and Sieve. So yeah, the only thing I'd change about this track is make it so that you drive through the castle on lap 2, so you can then do the final lap backwards. Otherwise though, you go Mario Circuit. And as for Waluigi Stadium, well I mean come on, it's Waluigi Stadium. It's a whimsical but still somewhat tough and technical stadium track, acting as a somewhat climactic penultimate course. No changes here. However, the two city tracks here, they definitely could have been swapped out for something else. Obviously, I already moved out Singapore, so no comment here, but while in a vacuum, Bangkok Rush isn't that unfitting as an opener, as its layout is fairly simple, and there aren't really a lot of hazards, that's also only because they took out all of them. The original tour version of this track not only had more obstacles on the road, but there were also just generally more quirky gameplay mechanics that made each section stand out more. And if the Deluxe version didn't remove all of that for seemingly no reason, I would argue that it would be way more fitting in a later wave. So instead, how about we push back Berlin byways to this slot? Yeah, I know I said its difficulty was appropriate for the Moon Cup, so it might be a little hard, but at the same time it's also a pretty generic city track in terms of theme, so not only is it good to get it out of the way early, but the energetic and uplifting soundtrack would also suit the positive vibes of Wave 4 well. So on the whole, I think it would be a fitting point of no return for city tracks, before they inevitably get more challenging and creative for real. And as for the city course capping off Wave 4, well, what was the track originally determined to end the Boomerang Cup? That was Los Angeles laps, right? Yeah, I think that would be a fitting choice. On the one hand, you could argue that the summer themed track would be better off in the summer wave after, but on another hand, I believe that as the last track of this wave, it could sort of act as a teaser for the summer season, and what to expect next. And I think that feeling would be strengthened even more by the fact that this course is massive. It's easily the largest city track by size, with each lap having a unique starting gate and taking you through a completely different area of the map. it would leave players wondering what unique ideas the last two waves would have for its city tracks, with just how different this one is. The only changes I'd make is maybe add a couple of Goombas to this long boring road and change the time of day back to sunset in order to properly make it feel like the end of a cup. All in all though, that's the way 4 cups finished and barely changed. Yeah, Nintendo really did a good job of opening up 2023 with a bang. But while it didn't change too much as a result, I hope my mildly adjusted take is hopefully a bit more organic still though. Starting from wave 5 though, this is the point where the booster course pass eventually stops holding your hand, as we're beginning to near the end of the DLC as a whole. And that is why, in my opinion, Athens Dash could almost not be a more perfect opener for the Feather Cup. Because following the already ambitious LA laps right before, Athens perfectly meets up your expectations with just how unique it is. Unlike the other city courses that largely take place on streets, this one instead takes place on the mountainous Acropolis, leading to a wildly more different kind of aesthetic and layout. And it kind of serves as your wake-up call that we're well past the safety of waves 1 to 4. It's challenging and climactic, reminding you how close we are to the end now, but it's still not too ambitious, staying on the shorter side and keeping a cheerful tone. Fitting to open up wave 5. That said though, the graphics would have to be fixed, like seriously, this is rock bottom ugly. For the second slot though, since we moved out Daisy Cruiser, I think this is the right place to push back a certain GBA remake toward. See, up until this point, the second course in each wave so far has been on the calmer and more uneventful side, typically as a means to wind down a little after their more ambitious opening tracks. However, starting from wave 5, we're not gonna have that luxury anymore, as we immediately lunge ourselves to the depths of Boo Lake. While in size this one is still pretty small, so it still technically winds down a bit, the far spookier theme, coupled with the more dramatic elevation changes, lets you know for sure that the booster course pass won't play around anymore, assuming you didn't get that memo from Athens already. After that though, while the third course will, admittedly, have a slightly more upbeat theme, it won't get any easier as we venture through the temples of Dry Ruins. Okay, so out of all the Wii remakes we got in Mario Kart Tour, why on earth was this the only one we did not get for the pass? And under Daisy's circuit as well, mind you. Not only would this one stand out thematically from the other desert tracks in the pass, with its more ancient Egyptian setting, but it's also just a really damn good course in general, with some incredibly strategic uses of half-pipes, and a fun gimmick where this pit continuously gets filled up with sand each lap. I think it would definitely be a nice way of raising the difficulty for this cup. Plus it would also give this Grand Prix cup a bit of a thematic consistency, as Athens Dash earlier is also based on ruins. And lastly, for the Feather finale, I think Squeaky Clean Sprint is another course which I already think is good where it is. And I mean, I don't really think I need to explain much why. It's only got one of the coolest and most creative themes out of any racetrack, taking place in a giant bathroom, and while I don't think the setting or music is climactic enough to be the last track of the wave as a whole, it certainly suits as the ender of the first Wave 5 cup. Just because of how ambitious it is. Honestly, it could have very well fit somewhere in Wave 6 as well, but you know, I suppose the layout is still a little too straightforward for that, so yeah, this place is perfect. All in all, that's the Feather Cup finished. This one was already pretty solid as it was, so no major changes here. The Cherry Cup though... Look, I don't think the Cherry Cup is bad or outright unfun, but oh lord, pretty much every track here has something that is terribly wrong with them, which just makes me groan thinking about them. I guess we can start with Sunset Wilds. This show should not be anywhere near Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's radar, considering this game not only doesn't support the dynamic lighting that makes the sunsetting possible, but the layout is also just boring as f***. Just throw it in the rubbish bin. Anyways though, one way I think the Cherry Cup could be marginally better was if the first track was a vastly improved version of Bangkok Rush. Originally, this course was actually datamined to be in this spot first, before it was oddly pushed forward to wave 4, and in hindsight, while I still love the track, I do wish we could have waited a bit longer, if that meant it would get the proper time and care it needed. If it were up to me, I'd make the sunset a burning orange again, add back the inky piranha plants under the subway bridge, put tuk-tuks on the road as obstacles, and give the boats back the trickable roofs you can bounce off from. Oh yeah, and I'd also change it so that after you exit the parking lot on the last lap, the remainder of the race will take you through the beginning of lap 1 but in reverse, just to wrap it up more poetically and with an engaging glider at the end. The point is that there's just so much missing from the tour version, and if the Booster Course Pass kept all of this, it would be a marginally more challenging and engaging course. It was always one of my favorite city tracks because of this, and coupled with the somewhat finalistic and bittersweet atmosphere, I think it would be the perfect opener for the Cherry Cup, to make you feel like you've come a long way and that the Booster Course Pass is soon gonna be over. But we're still not over, so we can't have it all be emotional. For the second track, we're gonna push forward the upbeat and challenging Koopa Keep to liven up the mood. While the remake we have now of this in the Booster Course Pass is pretty problematic in a lot of ways, one of the best things it did was scale down the whole track. It feels much more difficult and chaotic than it did in either Tour or 7 because of this, and makes it feel even more fast-paced as well, as you rush through these forests with the stream of the rivers. Although, it also still can't be understated how much every other change disappoints me, which I definitely like to fix. Make the rocks grey again, and drain out all of the water from the glass tube to make room for the electrical spinners again. It's just more interesting this way, and I think it would be an incredibly positive way to follow up on the more pensive Bangkok rush. But we're not gonna stay too cheerful for long, because for the third slot we have a course that I moved from its initial spot in Wave 1, DS Shroom Ridge. Why oh why was this deemed a fitting choice for as early as the first wave? Sure, they did tone down the traffic so that it's not only slower, but also only goes in one lane now, but I mean it's still a really twisty highway track in the mountains with lots of places to fall off from. And I think a track like that would suit itself a lot better later in the pass. And that's not to mention the atmosphere. Like Bangkok Rush, this is another course which, while laid back in theme, always had a somewhat climactic and finalistic feel to it, in part due to the music that sounds like it's the end of the road. And while that sort of vibe isn't exactly fitting for Wave 1, as the penultimate course of the penultimate wave, that would be simply put perfect. And while we're at it, why don't we change the time of day to a yellow sunset as well, to further amplify the nostalgic road trip vibes. So long as the art style is more detailed than this, it would be so beautiful in this spot. And the fact that Nintendo didn't put more love into this track makes me kinda sad. But what can I do? And lastly, capping off the second to last wave, I don't think there's anything that would be more aspiring to leave us on than what we already have here. Yes, I'm keeping Vancouver Velocity as the Wave 5 ender. Just like how Los Angeles laps would work as a teaser for the summer season, this one perfectly acts as a cliffhanger for the cold autumn and winter that is to ensue next wave. It's dropped down gorgeous with its snowy forests, quiet parks and Aurora Borealis in the night sky, and while I wouldn't say it's ambitious enough for Wave 6 as the layout is fairly straightforward, that's fine because the atmosphere perfectly invigorates you to stay tuned for the grand finale. That said, I have to fix the route, because what the fuck did they do? Why does it start off on easily the most epic and challenging variant, which even has an epic glider at the end, and then just cripple down into nothing for the last lap? Seriously, why isn't the order just reversed? That would be a way more exciting escalation. Plus, considering the first lap is the one that's snow-themed, while the other ones are more stereotypically autumn, lap 1 being at the end instead would organically make much more sense to, you know, build up to the winter. But yeah, aside from that one detail, what a great send-off for Wave 5. And with that, we're finally all the way at the end of the Booster Course Pass now, with the 6th and final wave. That only took me, what, 32 minutes? Jesus Christ, this is gonna be another long video, isn't it? But yeah, for these last two cups, they deserve to have the toughest, most original and celebratory tracks they can have, as Wave 6 isn't just the last batch of tracks for the DLC, but for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in general. And as controversial as it might be for me to say, but I honestly think Rome Avanti was the best way they could have opened up the Acorn Cup. Theming wise, it's a bit more standard compared to the other late game city tracks, as it mostly just takes place on streets, but because of how twisted the layout is to compensate, it works as a back to basics before the true show begins, and the foreboding color scheme and soundtrack do an excellent job of getting you in the mood for the rest of the wave. It's challenging, but not too crazy yet. And actually, DK Mountain is a pretty natural follow-up in terms of atmosphere, being another tough and slightly calm track, but with an added sense of adventure to build up Wave 6. Although, I'm still gonna toss this course into the bin, because the gameplay does not work well at all with 8 Deluxe's controls. Seriously, some of these turns are so insanely sharp that you have to brake drift, even on 150cc, which is just more frustrating than it's worth. Plus it just looks super ugly as well, due to the way the road does not transition smoothly into the grass at all. So, is there any other track that has this exact same vibe I'm looking for, but wouldn't play like complete shit? Oh yeah, that's right, the other GameCube jungle track. I mean, Dino Dino Jungle and Mario Kart World got a complete makeover anyways, similar to Choco Mountain. So like, what would it hurt to have a more traditional remake of this track in the past as well? Either way, it would certainly be an exciting second track for Wave 6, so I'm gonna include this one in. With that said, however, even though I like Daisy Circuit in this game, goodness gracious, why is this the third course of the Acorn Cup? Despite the fact that it's so painstakingly easy for a late game wave, I suppose I can kind of see why they put it as late in the game as they did, seeing as the atmosphere is pretty festive and celebratory. Heck, that's probably why they chose to showcase that track for Wave 6's teaser. But at the same time, not only would I probably never have considered putting this track in at all personally, but why oh why is it the third slot? At least if it was the second course, it could have served to slightly wind down after the challenging roam, but as the penultimate, it's such a major step back and feels so anticlimactic after the way more dangerous second track. And honestly, I don't think Piranha Plant Cove is epic enough to be an ender either. So how about that gets pushed forward to the penultimate slot instead? It's a pretty soothing underwater course atmospherically, but it's also pretty ambitious in the gameplay department, with fairly sharp turns and even the lap-changing arrows. When you take all of this into consideration, it definitely feels like the ultimate Mario Kart Tour Nitro track, being not only more challenging than the rest of them, except one, but also for the fact that it's the only one to take the trademark Tour arrow gimmick that's otherwise only used in cities or other retro tracks. So I definitely think this track works in this spot to raise the stakes, even if it's not quite climactic enough to be the finale. So what should be the ender of this cup then? 3 words: Bowser Castle free. This would be such a banger final note to leave us on. It's super intense in its theme and soundtrack, wildly dramatic in its design and elevation changes, but it's also still on the small side, which would work well as a teaser to show how much crazier the Spiny Cup will be.
Dude, Bowser Castle track should obviously be right up before Rainbow Road. How dare you move it off its rightful spot?
Just because that's been the tradition for so long does not mean it's a good idea here. It's still an SNES retro track at its core, and while they certainly did an amazing job at modernizing it, the fact remains that it's still pretty short and simplistic deep down, and it just doesn't feel right for it to be the second to last course of the entire game. Yeah, I think there are more ambitious tracks that they could use to build up to Rainbow Road instead, including most other Bowser castles. Speaking of, however, that finally leaves us with only the Spiny Cup left. Aside from the already aforementioned Bowser Castle 3, which is no longer here, I think this is another Booster Course Pass Cup that they almost nailed perfectly, with 3 of its tracks being the perfect last impression you could get for this DLC. For one, I don't think I could ask for a better last city track than Madrid Drive. Not just because it's my favorite one, but because it manages to keep every lap exciting with unique set pieces, such as the football stadium at the end of lap 3, plus it's just got such a climactic soundtrack and lap progression. It knows we're at the end of the Booster Course Pass, and it wastes no time letting you know too. And Rosalina's Ice World is almost the perfect direct follow-up as well. Out of all the courses in not just this DLC, but perhaps even 8 Deluxe as a whole, this might just be the toughest one of them all, with slippery ice physics, incredibly sharp and narrow roadways, and even an incredibly technical split path section, where you have to use the mushroom or the half pipes to stay on the upper and faster lane. I know a lot of people despise this course, unfortunately, but I think it's a magnificent showcase of your skills, and the somber and melancholy atmosphere only further adds to the finalistic feel of this cup, just for how unique it is from other Mario Kart tracks. And I don't think I need to explain why Rainbow Road is the best finale we could have gotten for this pass. It's challenging, long, and insanely varied in terms of its layout sections. It's all you could ask for when it comes to a last track, and not much more has to be said. So the only question now is, what should be the semi-final track of the game? What is a course that would be similar in vibe to Bowser's Castle, and would be a magnificent showcase of challenge and length to test your skills before Rainbow Road? Well, you may have noticed that there is actually one Tour original track that I haven't added to this DLC yet, and that's because, in my opinion, there is no course that would set you up better for the finale than Ninja Hideaway. When this track first launched with Wave 1 over 3 years ago, I was completely taken aback by the level of chaos that this track contained. It has some of the sharpest turns in the game, an insanely packed layout where you always have 2 parallel pathways, not to mention it's just really long and epic as well, taking place in an ancient Japanese ninja temple. It's not quite Bowser's Castle, but it's definitely the closest you can get to it without it being the actual thing. And taking its sky-high difficulty into consideration, I'm honestly shocked that they put it so early in the pass. I guess it's because they wanted a spring-themed track for their spring-themed first wave, but even though it makes sense in that regard, I honestly don't care. In my opinion, it would easily be the greatest final test of skills ever before Rainbow Road, as well as an absolutely kingly final impression for Mario Kart Tour tracks in general. I love it, and most people seem to love it in fact, so it would be, in my opinion, the perfect penultimate course for the Booster Course Pass. And so with that finally wraps up my full rework of all the cups and tracks of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's Booster Course Pass. And holy crap, did this take way longer than I thought it would. Like some of my other videos on this game lately, this is another project I wanted to do for a while but didn't really get around to, partly because of what an ambitious task this was, but hopefully you all had a tremendously fun time watching it. The Booster Course Pass may be over, but my videos on it sure aren't, and it's always going to be a part of me. But how would you fix the Booster Course Pass personally? Did you agree with me, or do you think the DLC is fine as it is? Let me know all of this in the comment section down below, and if you enjoyed the video, then make sure to like and subscribe to stay tuned for even more Mario videos on the channel. It would really help me out and incentivize me to pump out more content more often. And with all that being said, I'm signing off now. Until next time.